Best there is at what he does, and what he does is not very nice. It's Wolverine 2020, issue number 1, $7.99 cover price. Hey, it's a brand new ongoing series for Wolverine. This is the first brand new series coming out of Dawn of X. How is it? It's Benjamin Percy is getting a lot of good reviews off of X-Force, and Adam Kubert, who of course been around the X-Men forever, Viktor Bogdanovic. I'm saying I said that name okay. They put together a massive, big comic with 2 stories. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, this is Perch, reviewing Wolverine, brand new issue. It's February. It's time for the onslaught of, no pun intended, I don't think he's coming back, of new Dawn of X titles. So we're going to get into this real quick. Before I do, hey, if you have not subscribed to the channel, would love it if you would. I'm sure there's some good reason, but not only do you get this amazing content, and amazing audio, but you're going to get a video every single day of a lot of different things about the comic industry. So would love your support for the channel. So please subscribe if you haven't already. But this is Wolverine number 1. And so right off the bat, I want to say these are you basically get 2 comics in one. You get first Benjamin Percy, who's been writing X-Force, doing a fairly solid job, working with Adam Kubert to do a story that really feels like it's an extension of X-Force. You could put this comic in X-Force. It is an X-Force issue for all intents and purposes, even though Wolverine is at the center of it, but he's been at the center of a lot of the X-Force stories as well. And then the second story is features Viktor Bogdanovic, and it's one I like, honestly, better. And we'll get into that in a second. But first, we're going to start right off. Benjamin Percy has dropped Wolverine into one of those situations where he's not quite sure what's going on. There's been a massacre of sorts. He's torn up. He's healing. The other X-Men are dead. I think, a lot of people had some concerns with the Krakoa rebirth bit, and it's hurting. I think it is definitely hurting the stories, because there's almost every issue now somebody's dying, and it's like, well, they'll be brought back and everything else. And it's less, it is taking away some of the stakes. It's just too often. I mean, this is Jean Grey and Kid Omega's third death now in 6 months. It's too many. We've just gotta stop using that as a cheap kind of comic intro device. And unfortunately, this has been part of X-Force. It's been part of Wolverine now, and certainly. So anyway, we have some dead people. Wolverine's not sure who he was. We get a really odd picture of Wolverine from Kubert, but he's slowly healing himself, and we've got a mystery on our hands. Who did this? How does it happen? We flash back. This story is going to be told with a lot of time jumps to Krakoa, and Wolverine is hanging out with kids, playing hide and go seek. We get his relationship with Jean Grey touched upon. Then we get his relationship with Kitty Pryde touched upon. So you get kind of, the familiar beats of Wolverine going on here. The costume changes. Like in one panel, we've got Wolverine with the mask kind of pointing up, and then a page later, we've got a much smaller mask. So there's some inconsistency stuff going on that I'm not really used to seeing from Kubert. So we do get a really nice drinking sequence. I really liked Wolverine and Kitty sit down to drink some shots, and they have a nice story about how people have changed. And it's clear this comic right off the bat, Benjamin Percy is going to be really examining, who is Wolverine, what makes Wolverine Wolverine, and what is his true nature, and is he evolving? What does it mean to be Wolverine in Krakoa peacetime? A little bit of the same topics that Brian Edward Hill was trying to touch upon on Fallen Angels. Looks like those same themes being picked up here. So we have the mystery of some drugs are disappearing from the X-Men labs, and we're living in a world where the X-Men are drug dealers. That's where we are. That's what 2020 has brought us. And simultaneously, we've got a CIA spook who is investigating as well some murders. It's weird because he says he's from the CIA. Maybe he's not. But he's here interacting with the FBI, and he's kind of researching this kind of big murder and drug cartel. We're going to learn more about who this character is. A little too early to say whether it's going to be a big ongoing character as somebody just for the story, but it'd be nice to see kind of a human foil. It's one of the things that Chris Claremont did really well with the original Wolverine series is it provided a nice cast of people who are not mutants who could interact in Wolverine's world. And so I'm hoping that Benjamin Percy is bringing that together as well. And having kind of CIA and different law enforcement officials interact here is pretty good. So basically, we have this kind of side investigation. Wolverine's being sent off to go try and figure out what's going on. The guy from the CIA is also trying to figure out what's going on. We learn he's got a sick daughter who maybe can use drugs. So we gain a little bit of the motivation behind why this guy is determined and being driven here. And it's clearly a mystery. Plenty of data sheets about, filling out Wolverine's blood and how it works and all the rest. But basically, Wolverine, Domino, Kid Omega, Jean Grey get dropped into a cult. So this is a new supporting group that Percy is introducing, which is kind of a cult of X. And these are people who, crazy monk robe-like people who are worshiping the mutants, and then they're drinking some of the stolen drugs that they purchased somewhere, and it turns them into like crazy deceased people. They start kind of tearing up things. This causes, our X-Men to leap into action, defeat the baddies, and of course they all blow up because that's what people do when they take bad drugs. Hey kids, you are going to turn into red mist if you take drugs. Comics Code Authority approved. Anyway, after this, Wolverine kind of follows up, tracks down where the drugs are coming from. More mysteries here about what's going on, and so we're getting kind of this. Like I said, this is an X-Force story. There's a big kind of thing going on here around the drug trade and Wolverine kind of tracking down who's honing in, who's zeroing in on the X-Men's good old drug trade. There's an oddness to this story that just you can't really deny of just the X-Men are dealing now. I mean, I'm not meaning to be hung up on that. It's an interesting twist. But that all leads us kind of to the conclusion where Wolverine is kind of marching through the snow. He sees a spectral vision of a girl, the pale girl, that kind of drove him to do this stuff, or at least he's on edge. And as he gets there, he encounters the CIA people who also are there. Who are you? What are you doing here, man? They kind of meet up, and Logan's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. So there's a mystery. So a little bit of a jumble back and forth. The time skips made it a little bit. It was a regular, slightly larger than regular size story, and we got. It's a kickoff to an adventure. The challenge I had with the first part of the story is, again, it feels like just X-Force. That's ultimately what we've got. It's an issue of X-Force. Yes, Wolverine is the main star, and there's some familiar beats with the scene with Kitty Pryde and with Jean Grey and all the rest, and kind of the will they, won't they of, are they a couple or not? And that's all nice, but it's just not, it's not compelling. It doesn't feel compelling to me like the story we're going to get into. So the second part of the story features some really nice art. And it's interesting. I'm a fan of Kubert. I like him. I think he's, no complaints about Kubert. But when then you move right into a Viktor Bogdanovic story. Bogdanovic draws Wolverine really, really well. The character just looks solid. There's a lot of elements to this that just feel like a good classic Wolverine story. I'm thinking about the Hunt for Apocalypse, back the old Mike Mignola story, and some of the Jim Lee work, some of the John Byrne work. There's just an element to this that feels both familiar and dynamic. It's something we haven't seen. Kubert has done Wolverine a lot, and so while it's nice to see him on it again, there's a little bit of a kind of a nostalgia factor, but it does feel like we've seen many of these beats before. And some of the panels feel like Kubert is kind of, I want to say bored, because that sounds very, very negative, but just he's playing his greatest hits. Bogdanovic is doing some new things, and it's nice. So Wolverine's running around Krakoa, various things, and a bloody, beaten up Omega Red shows up. Wolverine immediately goes on the attack, but is stopped by Magneto. And Magneto is saying, hey, mutants are all welcome here. What's going on? He's all covered in blood. We need to go figure it out. Wolverine, why don't you go check it out. So Wolverine heads through the portal reluctantly because he does not trust Omega Red. Now, in recent times, Omega Red has kind of softened as a character. I'm thinking there's a couple issues where the character is more friendly to the X-Men, but here he's back to being kind of almost at the same villainous level as Sabretooth. Definitely, not to be trusted, problematic. Wolverine goes through the gate, lands in Paris, comes across this, trunk full of, massacred people, and says this is Omega Red. He's a monster. He goes back to Krakoa. Him and Magneto just have a nice little ideological fight. Wolverine goes to interrogate Omega Red, and we get more of the relationship between the two. Why have you been allowed salvation, Wolverine, where Omega Red cannot? Why is it that you can change and others can't? Putting some doubt in Wolverine's head. I like this dynamic a lot. I think this story was just really, really solid. But Wolverine then heads to Paris, gets drugged, and immediately is hanging upside down. Some kind of Greg Capullo-like style here from Bogdanovic. There's definitely you're reminded of it a bit. The art is very clean. The coloring is really nice in this story, and Wolverine's up against vampires. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Curse of the X-Men, the vampire story that went on back when the X-Men was relaunched. I don't remember how long ago, but this was when they were living on the little island outside of San Francisco, and they were fighting vampires. It's nice to see them go back to it, even though it wasn't my favorite storyline, because it's just reminding people, yeah, the X-Men have had a relationship with vampires. There is this bigger world. This is something I've kind of been waiting to see with the X-Men titles and Dawn of X in general, is that they're going to interact with existing things, known things in the world, not just these kind of new invented threats every comic. So there's Wolverine meets up with a buddy who she helps him out, escapes from the vampires. We see kind of this hunt is on, and they go to kind of take the fight to the vampires, which ultimately leads them to an understanding that Dracula is behind it. Now, Dracula is currently, or was currently, in the Avengers books. I'd love to know if this is, in coordination with that, or if we're going to get a weird kind of Dracula story over in Avengers and then a different one over here in Wolverine. I hope they're aligned, because this story is pretty solid, particularly the fact that having hunted all this down, they let Omega Red free on Krakoa, and he immediately goes back, and it's revealed he's working with Dracula, and basically to get Wolverine kind of into position, and in return he's getting some other parts. So it's that's pretty interesting. It's like, you're still within our service, and they're saying, join them, go to Krakoa, be my mole on the inside. I love the fact that we're seeing some outside forces starting to work against the X-Men on Krakoa, and what all that means. So great stuff. I think the second story for me was much better than the first. It felt more like a Wolverine story as opposed to just an extension of X-Force. It also felt like they were doing some new things, which I really appreciated. And so I just think that backup story was great. So we're curious where this all goes. If we basically saw a teaser for a story that's going to get picked up in issue 6 or something, or I'm not sure how the arcs are going to ultimately work. But hey, it's the first of the new Dawn of X titles. We're getting Giant Size. We're getting Cable. We get a little ad there at the end of the comic of all the new Dawn of X titles we're getting. But despite the high price, this is a decent issue. I think there's some parts of it that definitely worked. Like I said, the second issue was just really, really on point. I think it was, it's both familiar, but not so much so that it felt like nostalgia bait, like they were just, going through the same motions that the first story kind of had a bit. That's my opinion anyway. I think the first story, you could have easily slapped X-Force, the label on it, and it would have been an X-Force story. But the second story did feel like Wolverine. So that was pretty good. Still a very steep price for people, but anyway, let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Would love to know, did you pick this issue up? Did you like it? Which story did you like better? Are you going to be following this going forward? And what do you think? So hope you enjoyed the review. Comment, like I said, and definitely subscribe. If you're enjoying the content here, please subscribe. Would appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.